Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got two very special guests. That is Dr. Mark Bailey and Dr. Sam Bailey coming to us from New Zealand. Their YouTube channel has amassed millions of views. The website, I'll put all those links below. But yeah, you guys have been doing some amazing work for many years now. And we're going to be diving into what are viruses, are they real, what causes disease, big pharma corruption, all the good juicy stuff that people love. So welcome to the show and give us a bit of your background and journey of awakening and medicine and all that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Alex. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that resonate with your audience because, like you, we used to be health practitioners, in quotes, within the mainstream system. And now, obviously, we're not, made a paradigm shift. And yeah, I guess I can start and say I graduated as a medical doctor in 1999, and I was instantly not really comfortable with what I was doing. In fact, the first day I worked as a doctor, I went home and thought, I can't do this. I'm going to have to look at something else. Luckily, I was also a pro athlete around that time. And so I had many years in the sports field doing that and kept up my part-time work as a doctor, and then came back to it kind of full-time in 2007, which is when I met Sam. And by this stage, look, I already had some major concerns about allopathic medicine, which is the mainstream system. And I guess I started corrupting Sam at that point as well and started putting ideas in her head. She'd only been working for a year or two. And I said, there's so many problems with what we do. And we talked about it a lot. And both of us tried to find an area within the medical system where we could work and be happy and think that we weren't harming patients, but we couldn't really do that. We even had a period, and this is stuff you're familiar with, of working as clinical trials physicians. So, I mean, this is testing drugs on humans for the first time. And it opened our eyes, and instantly we started, going home and saying, I don't think that these pharmaceuticals are helpful.
Yeah.
And the new ones they're trying to bring out seemed even worse, basically.
Yeah.
And we became aware of how the clinical trials industry worked, and that big pharma controlled it. They controlled the data. So, i.e., whether it was released to the public or not, they controlled the narratives that were being sent to the doctors. And it was interesting. It was really such a informative part of our journey to see how drugs were developed and then the narratives were created. And yet we were like, well, we were around when they introduced that drug, and that's not what we witnessed.
Yeah.
We didn't see all these benefits, and we just saw a whole lot of problems, basically.
Well, let's get into the study stuff in a sec. But Sam, do you have anything else to add about kind of your waking up process with Mark starting to hassle you and stuff?
Yeah, it was kind of so he was always the canary in the coal mine for me. And then I had a strange sort of I started an online doctor service, so like before that was normal. and then I got
which got Sam in trouble, by the way. She started this online service before anyone else had, and back then it was considered you're not allowed to do medicine online, and they gave her. Nowadays, obviously, it's normal, but back then it wasn't.
Yeah, and so I got headhunted for this to do as a TV presenter, like to be a doctor for this TV show thing. And I really liked it. And I talked to one of my friends about it, and she said, you should do vlogging, like video logging. I didn't know what this was, like YouTube. I mean, well, you're already doing this, Alex. At this stage, I had no idea what. I'm like, who would want to listen to me? I'm nobody. And she's like, people would want to watch you, Sam. You could talk about drugs and things, and this will help bring business to your, to your online business. So I started this, and then 2020 happened, and I only had a really small channel, like, I don't know, like about 4,000 or 5,000 people. And I was getting all these questions about coronavirus. And I said to Mark, can you help me? Because I don't know about this. And I feel like this is kind of out of my depth. And
well, we should say at this point, I'm out of medicine because like you, Alex, you got out in 2017, I think, of your pharmaceutical work. I got out in 2016. I was done with allopathic medicine and the mainstream system, but Sam continued. And so in 2020, as she says to me, can you come and help me research this situation that's brewing in Wuhan?
China, yeah.
And, I'd been out of medicine for 4 years and I was enjoying my life away from it. And initially I was a little bit reluctant. But Sam said, something's brewing, like on the world stage. Something doesn't add up. And she said, we haven't really looked into it, but can you look into this whole situation? And I said, okay, sort of reluctantly became part of it. And within a couple of weeks, I said to Sam, this is the huge global fraud going on. There is no coronavirus, I don't think. And I don't think there's any viruses at all, in fact, in the wider sense. And
I still remember this, Alex, because this is, just really quickly, it was so pivotal to me. Mark said, I think you should sit down. And he said, I don't think viruses exist. And I was like, what? What do you mean? How can this be? And then I had like 1,000 questions, like, well, what about antibodies? And what about, how does this work? And what about the electron micrograph images and stuff? And because we discovered this book called Virus Mania that changed everything for us. It talked about pandemics and about how this is artificial and how it's been created.
Yeah.
And as soon as he did that, I realized, oh my gosh, I have to read this book. And I started making videos on my YouTube channel and talking about this. And then eventually in September of 2020, I had a major kind of career crisis where I made a video where I said I wouldn't get any vaccines if and when they came out, like the coronavirus ones. And then I got a phone call from the TV show saying, take down your video. And I said, I won't. And so they fired me. I got told I can't come into my work anymore after 12 years of the same job, never had a patient complaint. And then I got investigated by the Medical Council, which regulate doctors in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like the rest is kind of history. But it was like a huge change for me of like what I thought I was going to be doing in my life. And then I realized that you have to choose the way to go. And for me, it was removing the fear and thinking, what would I do if I had no fear? And it was, I have to keep following this path. And so I kept making videos and getting in more trouble.
Yes.
So yeah, you can say that the system trained us up in the dark arts, as you know.
Yeah.
And now we decided, okay, well, we're going to turn against things here. And it really was the March 2020 where things swung. And because Sam said somebody has got to say something about this COVID fraud, because the WHO had just announced, that it's a pandemic and that there's a new disease and that there's this coronavirus. And we could see that it was fake, that they had no evidence behind any of this. And Sam was so shocked that none of her colleagues would say anything. Yeah. Like they were all completely silent.
This is probably an important point because we don't want to bash on, the good people. And this is something I always say. There's plenty of good people in nursing, pharmacy, doctors that fully still believe that they are doing the right thing and doing evidence-based medicine and all that type of thing. And it is kind of like the mind control and all this other stuff we talk about that is prevalent in society. And there's so many social pressures to quit if you've got that mortgage and you're sending your kids to a good school. And there's all these different reasons why people might not be comfortable speaking out and whatnot, right? So it's not like everyone that's a doctor is bad and they know that they're not making a difference at all. That's an important message for people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And people say that to us. They say after reading our work or watching our presentations, they say, well, how could everyone be in on it and on the scam? And we say, well, it doesn't work like that. Yeah. It's narratives that come out from high-level sources, whether they're ministries of health or the CDC or the WHO. And then you have a whole lot of people who are dependent for their incomes on carrying these narratives forth. And if they go against them, typically they get censured, they might lose their work completely or just get an incredibly hard time by their colleagues. So yeah, there's the way things are set up. It doesn't require everyone to be, quote, in on it. It just requires a certain narrative to be promulgated and it gets accepted by the practitioners and they go with it.
And this is the centralization of power that people are waking up to across all industries, right? It's not just medicine. People are really starting to see this throughout the media or governments or whatever all these agendas that are being pushed. But for me, the light bulb moment was, mRNA and nanoparticle delivery, and like all this stuff that had never been used in humans before. And that's the number one rule in medicine, that we don't use that kind of stuff on pregnant women or children, and all that type of stuff. So yeah, I don't want to get too deep into COVID specifically today, because I know people are itching to get into all the virus stuff in that book that you mentioned before. But before we do, it probably is important to talk about the studies and how they work and pass these things. So maybe talk about the stuff that you've learned, and on the channel I've mentioned about how, you've just got to beat a placebo to show that something is effective, and then they can manipulate study numbers and exclude certain people and include others, and sort of massage those numbers to sort of show that something is effective. And even then, when you really dive into the data, the longer term stuff about the number of patients you need to treat to prevent one incidence and the cost of all that, it's just none of it really adds up when you really think critically, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, well, there's numerous aspects here, and numbers needed to treat is something so vital. And because the way it's presented to the public and the patients is really deceptive, because a doctor might say to the patient, and this is on their own terms, which we don't necessarily agree with, but they may say, look, the studies show that this medication is effective in preventing heart attacks. But they don't say to the patient, but the numbers needed to treat are 97. And if they actually explain what that meant to the patient, then the patient probably would refuse the medication, I would imagine, because they'd have to say to the patient, in order to prevent one event, such as a heart attack, we have to treat 97 people. We don't know which 97 we need to treat. We just have to throw this stuff out like your livestock. And one of you will get the benefit, and 96% of you that take it won't get the benefit. So you're basically saying that to most people that take it, there's no benefit whatsoever. And they are taking the risk of all of the side effects, or we should say adverse effects, because they are effects of the pharmaceuticals. So the numbers needed to treat, and it's often horrendous, not only for pharmaceuticals, but for other interventions, surgery, pacemakers, all of these, stents, all those kind of things. And if people actually understood and it was explained to them what the numbers needed to treat meant, I'm sure that the majority of people would not agree to the intervention, and they'd say, you know what, I'd rather take my chances here.
Just on the numbers need to treat, we did touch on that like in a bit of depth in our pharmacy course, but in the medicine course, I know you guys kind of do a bit less of all that. Is that fair to say that most doctors wouldn't really know these numbers either?
They wouldn't know the numbers for particular drugs, but we became very familiar with it because of the clinical trials world, where you're dealing with medications and explaining things in more detail than a normal doctor would. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely taught and understood, but it's just in terms of the informed consent to patients, that's like, because there's different agendas at play with any kind of. If you go and see a particular specialist, this is their job, this is their work. If they're a surgeon, they'll want to do surgery. If they're a neurologist, they'll want to do their neurology. Like it's whoever you're seeing, there's a financial interest as well as, just their own training of, this is my area, so I'm going to do what I know what to do. Like if you go to a car mechanic, they're going to deal,
100%. So I should tell you guys as well, I broke my back playing Aussie rules football and ended up getting pretty badly addicted to opiates, even though I kind of knew the risks, and you guys know that's a slippery slope, and I was able to get off them eventually, thankfully, because I kind of knew what you'd have to do to get off them and stuff. But the surgeons wanted to do surgery and put screws in my back and told me I'd never be able to exercise in that again. And here I am, I took the opposite of all their advice, healthier and happier and lifting weights at the gym and doing everything that they said that I would never be able to do again. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally, Alex. And there are just narratives everywhere. And Sam and I found this when we worked in particular specialties. Like I worked in musculoskeletal, which was closely associated with orthopedics. And I worked in a lot of fracture clinics. I ended up doing hundreds and hundreds of them, and finding out that there was just no evidence for some of these procedures that they were doing. Like I would find studies which said that, no, there's basically you just do nothing and you get the same outcomes as surgery. But they were not the narratives that were being pushed by the industry. The industry would just invent their own narratives. And if they didn't have a study to back it up, like a randomized control trial or something similar, they'd just say, well, expert opinion. Now, we all know that expert opinion is virtually worthless because, as Sam has said, there are vested interests. So you don't listen to an expert in medicine because they are only going to promote what they do, which is prescribe drugs or do a surgical intervention. So, yeah, I mean, it's this nature of the system which people don't understand, and they basically get brought into it like victims and are used to bring profit to the industry.
So any thoughts, just to sort of wrap up on the surgery topic, but any thoughts on some of the newer stuff that is coming out about the maybe, you know, cartilage being healed or newer treatments or just nutritious diets and these sort of things that can all help with inflammation, arthritis type injuries where maybe they are pushing surgery a lot? And I guess the other aspect is, do you think surgery is good in like emergency situations? I think that's kind of something that we can all agree on, you know, emergency medicine to do surgery after a car crash and save lives. I don't think anyone's against that type of surgery.
No, definitely. And we always have caveats with our work, and that is to say, if you've got a collapsed lung or a bone compound fracture, bone sticking out through the skin, the hospital, the mainstream system, they will be your best friends. They know how to deal with that stuff, the acute medical side of things. It's the chronic side of things that they do not know how to deal with, or they have models which intentionally just propagate sickness in order to keep patients in the system. But yeah, like you say, I mean, with things like arthritis, that almost invariably, these are lifestyle issues. So in countries like ours, it's an obesity epidemic. And not only is that loading the joints inappropriately, but people that are obese are in a pro-inflammatory state. So they have a background of inflammation in their entire bodies, which also makes the joints sorer. They get into metabolic issues. So they get things like gout and other crystal arthropathies, where they're getting deposition of waste products inside their own bodies because the body simply is overwhelmed and can't detox. And that's lifestyle. It's poor diet. It's lack of exercise. It's, accumulation of toxins from environmental and pharmaceutical sources. So definitely, I mean, the body, the capacity to heal is unbelievable. And most of the time, unfortunately, in mainstream medicine, they're just getting in the way of the healing and interfering with it. So,
Can I just say, the one great revelation I had, Alex, was in this, you realize that when you go to medical school, pharmacy school, whatever, you're taught these certain mantras and you repeat them because you think it's all fact. And one of them I thought was that a lot of these chronic diseases, there's nothing you can do. You can just manage them. So, for example, osteoporosis, I thought that wasn't curable. I believed that because that's what we were taught in medical school, that you need to take certain pharmaceuticals forever and you manage it. Whereas it was the realization that these conditions can be fully cured. That's not just like fantasy or anything. That's
And these narratives and slogans come from the pharmaceutical industry. Like Sam's got a video called Safe and Effective, and it shows that this is a narrative that just keeps getting rehashed. Like they wait a few decades and then they rehash it again. And they rehashed it during the COVID era. And this is it from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, one of my light bulb moments was a documentary called Reversing Diabetes in 28 Days. It's an old one now, but I don't know if you came across it. But that was one of the first things I really looked into, was like cholesterol and the demonization of animal fats versus the sugar industry and all that angle, and then how this keto diet and all that can heal it. These things that we, like you said, are told aren't reversible. But anything to add before we move on to the virus juicy stuff?
Well, we just got to issue a warning. This is the Bailey's public health warning. And I know that the people who think that they issue public health warnings won't agree with this one, but we'll say don't outsource your health to the medico-pharmaceutical industry, because they will accept you as customers and they will take you in and they will profit from you and not necessarily help you whatsoever.
Yeah, and my only thing else I would say is, what medicine can do is cut, burn, and poison. And a lot of the treatments that are used, I mean, we know that radiation itself can cause cancer. That's not some mystery or anything. And a lot of the treatments are actually incredibly harmful. And you have to go into it with knowing that in your mind that it's it's all backwards. It should be where you can get your health by yourself. You don't need anything external to do that.
I don't know what you guys think about like natural law and getting back to just everything nature based and that type of thing. I tell people, and every time we put a substance that's a chemical made in a factory with whatever industrial or like all these types of things, it's just your body has never handled that throughout its evolution or history or whatever. It just doesn't have necessarily the mechanisms to metabolize that and get rid of it. And it's just because our bodies are perfectly balanced systems, right? And anything you put in that's external and not natural, for the most part, is putting that out of whack. So again, getting back to first principle thinking for people at home with all this type of stuff.
Definitely. And I know, Alex, you had to come out of this paradigm just like we did. And that is to accept, despite all of the high-level training we got at these institutions, the body does not have a pharmaceutical deficiency. It's not why you get sick. Now, there's a caveat. There's very isolated things, such as type 1 diabetes. Most people don't know how to cure that, and we need synthetic insulin and that sort of stuff, which is made by pharmaceutical companies. But for the rest of our problems, we don't have a pharmaceutical deficiency. And the effects of drugs are not some magic bullet. They're not some targeted therapy. What happens is our body recognizes these as petrochemical derivatives, as poisons, and then moves as quickly as it can to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Now, when things happen, like your heart rate goes up or down, or something happens to your breathing, or something happens to your hormones, that is not a targeted effect of most of these drugs.
Yeah.
Most of it was just experimental animal studies where they said, oh, look at this is interesting. And then they made up a narrative and said, oh, it acts on this receptor, or it does this intracellular pathway. And it was that paradigm shift to say, oh my goodness, no, your body is saying, I've been poisoned, and what do I need to do to get rid of this poison? Yeah. And if it drops your blood pressure or drops your heart rate, that's just a result of the body's response to the poisoning.
Yeah. One thing I sort of tell people to ask their doctor is just simple questions like, is there a way to get back to full health naturally? How many patients have you ever healed back to full health from a chronic disease? And I think people need to put that pressure back on doctors a bit to break them from the spell. Because if a doctor sits there and think, hold on, I've never got someone back to full health in my 10 years and thousands of patients, these little seeds that we can all plant and just ask honest, basic questions. We're not being rude or anything. Put that pressure back on the doctors about the studies, numbers needed to treat, all these things we've discussed.
Yeah, 100%. And I was incredibly pro-vaccine, until waking up, and I'd never looked into it. And then I still remember, like at medical school, we had a whole session on how to deal with anti-vaxxers. They come in with lots of paperwork, and it looks all fancy, and you don't need to worry about it because this has all been refuted, But I think the pushback is incredibly important from the ground level because it makes people think. And you can see this now, the lack of trust in the medical system we've never seen anything like it. Like in terms of the people that not getting vaccines for their children is, it's widespread what the effect has been of, COVID.
Right. Did that just trigger the YouTube censorship?
I think you can say most things these days. Yeah, that is interesting, right? And COVID did wake so many people up to all this because they saw around them people that were dropping of heart attacks and strokes, or young people that have got all these aggressive cancers. And we see this in the broad statistics now in these certain countries. And so doctors and nurses are the ones that aren't staying up to date with their flu and COVID boosters and stuff. So we're just seeing this everywhere now, while the media, I sort of tell people, I don't think we're ever going to get the truth and an apology from the government and the media. It is just going to come from the people in the next generation But yeah, any thoughts on all that?
Well, it's interesting, Alex, because the media have to move it eventually because they get hassled so much. And we do see some things happening in the media now. Like, for instance, Sam released a video earlier this year because what we felt was significant was there was a study in which they tried to transmit the flu between human volunteers. They couldn't do it. Now, we know this, those of us that work in the space, because there's actually 100 years of failure to transmit illness through these studies. And the most important book here is written by an Australian, Daniel Reuters. He published recently a book called Can You Catch a Cold? Just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He documents over 200 of these studies that have been hidden, basically. Doctors don't know about this stuff, where they try and transmit these illnesses and it doesn't work. Now, the media doesn't report on this, but because too many people are talking about it now, earlier this year, the media around the world had to report on this study where they brought all these people into a hotel room that had the flu and they tried to transmit it to others and it didn't work. So what we have now is damage control. They're saying, oh, yeah, we did these studies, but these are the reasons that it didn't transmit. And of course, there's a virus and da-da-da-da. We're also seeing, and this is really interesting for Sam and I and others that work in the space, is the fact that they even admit that there are people that say there are no evidence for viruses. Because once upon a time, that did not appear in the media.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a thing. But because too many people know about this stuff now, we're starting to see it creep into the mainstream, where they're saying, oh, there are certain crazy people that say there are not viruses. But the very fact that they mention it means that they're losing. And that's interesting.
And as you're saying, some of those other studies, just for people at home, they were doing things like getting the sputum sample saliva, like putting it down people's throats, in their noses, doing whatever they could in some of these older experiments to try and make people sick from all the sick people. And it just never worked. So, yeah.
Well, Alex, it's Sam's got a few videos which are even more X-rated than what we're talking about because they get into things like alleged sexually transmitted diseases, again, hidden from the public, that the United States Human Health Services were running these studies last century where they were getting people drunk, prisoners, and getting prostitutes in. They were trying to spread alleged infections.
Like syphilis and
it didn't
gonorrhea.
work. It did not work. And they were shocked. And they had to do damage control, which involved traumatizing people's genitalia artificially and then claiming that that caused the infection to transmit. But through all of the natural routes, and they were getting them to do pretty intensive interactions. They were not transmitting anything. And Sam and I were shocked in 2020 when we first came across this material, because we were like, why were we not shown this stuff? Whether it was the Spanish flu, gonorrhea, HIV, we thought, okay, this is really transmissible stuff. That's the figures we've been given. And then the actual study showed no transmission.
Yeah, I mean, and this was such a paradigm shift, actually, Alex. For me, what I kind of realized is, I didn't know this, that many of the conditions that we talk about, different viruses or infectious diseases, all of the evidence is based on usually one or two papers, the foundational papers, and everything is propagated from there. It always references back to those original papers. And so what Mark and I would do, mostly Mark, because he's very good at doing the research, is go back and find these original papers. And sometimes they're in different languages, German or what have you. And we have to get them translated and look at and see what happened. And it's crazy when you read it and you think, this is what they did. This is the animal torture experiments that they basically did to try and prove that polio exists or whatever else. And you realize, oh my gosh, there's nothing here. Like, there isn't anything here.
And the extrapolations are preposterous. Like, for example, take polio, which we're told is highly infectious and, you can pick it up and get paralyzed and all this kind of stuff. And we were like, well, where was this established? Where was the original study? Now, you go back about 115 years and you find some Rockefeller Institute sponsored studies. These guys are getting in there to promote the stuff as the pharmaceutical industry is developing.
Gearing up.
And you find that, they got 2 monkeys. And what they did is they found a child who had died of polio symptoms and mushed up his spinal cord, opened up the brain of a monkey and injected a cup of the muck into the other, into a monkey's brain. It gets paralyzed and they go, oh my goodness, that proves that there's
polio.
A virus. And we're like looking at it going, what? Oh my goodness, this
isn't science.
That's not science. That's not controlled. Injecting muck into an animal's brain is going to paralyze it. That's for sure. But that is the paper that then gets cited forever. That's what they fall back to, and it's shocking. And we've found this with everything. We went right back to the 1800s and got into Robert Koch's work, Louis Pasteur's work, looked at their original papers, rabies, tobacco mosaic virus, anthrax, all of them. And we were like, okay, this is really, it's fraud. There's no other word for it. They never established that these were contagious conditions.
Yeah, well, I do want to kind of get into some of that as well, and maybe how when we do see like outbreaks on that in a second. But let's get into the virus stuff now, about what we believe they are and what researchers that all work in this field are looking at, and sequencing, and just kind of how they get to these conclusions where they are. They do genuinely believe they're looking at things and sequencing things and all that type of thing. But I know another light bulb moment for me at uni when we look at bacteria, fungal, and these things that have the traditional mechanisms of, a mitochondria, a cell wall, the organelles, and then you look at a virus, and to me that was like, that looks like a little robot or a little Lego. It does not look natural. And now with stuff coming out about nanotech, the mind boggles, like, man, this could be anything, but they're not alive. And this is another thing about how they're, meant to be spread around. How can something that needs a host cell to replicate and move spread around and get into cells and all this type of stuff? But yeah, talk to me about everything you think like viruses are and what you've learned and the sequencing and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, this is a huge topic, and look, a lot of people at the end of this discussion are going to say, but what about this and what about that? And I can only say, look, you can come to our website and check this stuff out, because we've covered all elements: genomics, PCR, antibodies, animal studies, human studies, epidemiology,
electron microscopy.
It's taken years to cover all this material.
Yeah.
Now, I have written a technical paper. It's called A Farewell to Virology. People can download that for free. It's about 28,000 words. It's technical and it's not for everyone, but it does explain the history of virology and how we got led into this paradigm, and why all of the so-called tests they have done or scientific studies are based in pseudoscience, and they don't establish that viruses are real. Perhaps the most important thing is that the field called virology and the virus model was established before knowing if viruses even existed. So they had never established that. It was invented at a time when they did not have technology that was capable of visualizing anything down to the nanoscale, which was required. And so they just came up with a model to explain illness. Now, the initial studies actually refuted themselves. So this is in the late 1800s. Pasteur's work, Dmitry Ivanovsky, who was said to have discovered the first virus. None of this happened. And we've been back, got those papers, translated them, and analyzed them to show that no control experiments, no independent variable, nothing that would meet the description of the virus was proven. All they had was plants, animals, humans getting sick, and then the so-called model to explain why they got sick. We come through to the 1930s. Now, a lot's happened in between then, but jump to the 1930s when the electron microscope comes into existence. Now, up until this point, they've got light microscopes. Now, light microscopes are powerful, and one advantage is that you can visualize living tissue. So we can look at things like bacteria and fungal cells. We can see they're real, and we can see what they do, how they replicate. We can analyze what proteins do they have, what genetic sequences. That can all be done, and we're not questioning that. The problem was in the 1930s, they thought, well, now that we've got the electron microscope, we can just see the viruses because we can image things down to the nanoscale. And they found a problem that they were taking samples from people that were said to have viral illnesses, smallpox, measles, chickenpox. And they took those samples and they looked at them. And then they looked at samples from people that were healthy. No difference. There's no way you can distinguish between those samples. It's not possible unless the person is, given some heads up about what they're looking at or whatever. But it doesn't work. That was found to be not a way to do things. So the virus model's looking in huge trouble. They're not finding these entities in nature. But then in the 40s and the 50s, they invent this technique, the cell culture technique. And it's so preposterous, this technique, that they need to mix the sample, so a blood sample or a snot sample, wherever they get it from, and they have to mix it with another cell line. They love using like animal kidney cells, like little green monkey kidney cells, because they tend to break down quite readily. And they added antibiotics, antifungals, other substances, and mixed it all together. And then the cell culture broke down and little particles appeared. And they said, finally, we've found the viruses we were looking for. The problem is, and we won't get into all the details here because there's too many, but there are so many problems with this.
Yeah.
One is that they started saying they had isolated viruses, but any child could see mixing together multiple cell lines, antibiotics, antifungals, other substances, and putting them all together in a well or a test tube. You're not isolating anything. You're just mixing a whole lot of stuff together. Yeah. And then they were using the electron microscope to say, well, look, there's some particles over here. That's the virus. But the electron microscope is just imaging dead tissue. It's by this point, it's been treated with chemicals, dehydrated, embedded in resin, cut super thin. What are we looking at? We don't know what we're looking at. We don't even know if this represents biological reality. There's no gold standard to compare this to. So we call this the point and declare, which is essentially you just point at something and say that's the virus. And those of us that criticize this would say, well, all you have is a static image. How do you know what the biological role of that is? How would you know what its genetic material is, if it has any? How would you know if it has anything to do with creating disease? Because we have to remember, by this stage, they're not even, by the middle of last century, they're struggling with the definition of virus. They don't even know what it is because they're still making it up. And that's happened right through to the present day. If you ask a doctor for the definition of virus, they will not know. A virologist may even struggle with this. And the reason I know that is because I wrote a paper about it. And I went around all these different sources trying to find out what the definition of a virus was. And some of the textbooks even struggle. They come up with these wishy-washy descriptions, But essentially, it is supposed to be a nano-sized particle with a protein-like coat containing genetic material that is capable of being contagious. It's an intracellular parasite, and it's replication competent, meaning that if it goes into the cell, more copies result, which then end up bursting out and affecting, other cells or other organisms. That's a very specific definition.
In old Latin textbooks, was the definition more something like a toxin or a venom and like that type of angle?
Correct. Yeah. That was the original meaning in Latin, was just toxin or poison. And we're happy with that because we agree that in biological tissue and in environmental sources, there are toxins. Yeah. And it's reasonable to say that that's a virus. But the definition that they've come up with has just morphed over time, but it's become the very complicated one that I just said. Yeah. And we're like, there's no study ever that comes remotely close to demonstrating what they claim is a virus. Now, that's the state of the science. And unfortunately, they've invented all these other things, particularly since the 1980s and when they launched the fake AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
So they said that was the result of HIV. Now we're into the era where they just use molecular tests, so antibody tests, PCR, lateral flow in more recent times. None of these things, genomics, they don't require viruses. And that's what people need to understand. You have to actually find the thing in nature. You can't just use these indirect tests that I've just talked about and say that indicates that there's a virus. So, and this is something that I know you want to touch on, because it gives the impression that something's spreading because you run out a test into the community and start testing people, PCR, antibodies, lateral flows. It will give the impression that something is spreading just by the nature of running the test out into the community.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with proof of virus. And I know it's really hard sometimes to get to that point of understanding, but it's where we need to be.
Anything to add to that sort of history of viruses, Sam, before we get into some DNA and sequencing type stuff?
No, just the only other thing I think that was quite interesting was just, the idea of how viruses work is that they're supposed to come into a cell, use the instruments of the cell to replicate, and then the cell gets overwhelmed and it bursts and lots of viruses spill out, and then it cascades around the body, presumably until either your body's able to clear it and form an immunity or you die. And one of the early on things I didn't realize, but was that you can take incredibly sick people with AIDS, for example, they cannot find the virus when they're just about to die.
Yeah, we call this the virus quantity paradox, where they have people that they say have HIV, AIDS, and they run PCR, and then from that they invert it and create what's called a viral load, saying how much virus have you got on board. But some people have these viral loads that are through the roof and they are walking around perfectly fine. They don't even seem to have symptoms.
Yeah.
And like Sam says, some are at the end of their life. They are said to have AIDS and their system is now overwhelmed. The virus has gone crazy, but the viral load has dropped through the floor on their own terms. And we're like, well, where did it go?
Yeah.
And the other thing is with that quantity paradox is they're saying that the virus quantity is so huge that it's overwhelmed the person's system, their defenses. And we're like, okay, that's fine. But why, when we take a blood test or droplets from a sneeze, can they not find any? And you get all these paradoxes where in the COVID era, they said that if someone sneezes, a single droplet of, that we can't even see with our eye has 200 million copies of the COVID virus. And we said, well, that's fine, but why, when we take a drop, can't we see any? None. And none of this makes sense on their own terms.
Absolutely. So let's get into the sequencing and kind of the newer science. And, people at home will be asking questions like, when they do a test and it shows positive for influenza A or, COVID or whatever these different strains are. And then we hear about RNA viruses or DNA. What are these people, where are they getting this sequence from when they're doing this testing and that type of thing?
It's like Harry Potter, just by the way.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother world.
Yeah, we use this analogy because people will say, but, and we'll say, yeah, Harry Potter is a very complicated world of characters and stories, but it's fiction.
Yeah.
And yes, there may be some internal consistencies within the story, but it doesn't mean that it corresponds to reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's happened is this is what we refer to as turtles all the way down. And it's something Sam alluded to earlier, was whenever there's a claim that they found a virus, you need to go back to the original study. There'll be 1, 2, usually at most a handful of studies where they say this is the proof, this is where we found the virus. And the issue with that is that from then onwards, they say that the samples contain whatever virus it contains. Here's a classic example that's relevant to COVID. After World War II, the United Kingdom set up the Common Cold Unit, and it ran for about 4 decades. The head virologist was David Terrell, and he was big on discovering new, quote, viruses. I mean, apparently hundreds of them. So these guys are studying common colds, and they're saying that they find a class of viruses called coronaviruses. Now, they have no proof of this at all. Again, they're just using this model that they'd invented. And what he did was he went and got a droplet of snot from a schoolboy who had a cold, and he put it in a vial, and he gave it a code name, and he carried this thing around for several years. And then he took it to June Almeida, a Scottish electron microscopist, and he said, June, I know there's a virus in here because that's all it can be. That's the only cause of a common cold. Can you find it? She looks at it under the electron microscope, and hey presto, says, I've found something. It's circular. It's got a corona, and they called it coronavirus. So this is in the late 60s, and we have the birth of what they say are human coronaviruses. But, you know, back then it's just the common cold. They're not saying that it can cause anything serious. Now, the problem is these samples that they have then get propagated over time, and they come into, you know, the 1980s, the end of last century, and we get into the sequencing era. So now we can actually say, well, what genetic material is in these sequences? And they find these sequences and then falsely attribute them to viruses when they were never, ever shown to come from viruses. Problem at that point is they get uploaded, these sequences, onto GenBank, which is a genetic database. GSAID is another one. And then when anyone else finds those sequences anywhere in the world, they shout, bingo, I have found that same sequence. And they say, I have found a coronavirus. The problem was they never showed the existence of the coronavirus in the first place. And it's just people repeating this process over and over again. Like, to give you an example, I believe the first fully sequenced, quote, coronavirus was about 1990. And this is when the spike protein appeared, because they were doing experiments with bovine or cow cells, and they said that they had found these genetic sequences and proteins, and when the cells were breaking down in the test tube, and they said it must be a coronavirus. So they uploaded those to the database, and that's the first time the spike protein appeared, because there's a lot of mythology around the spike protein. But to Sam and I, there's no mystery. It was just in the 1990s they started uploading these sequences, and they called them spike proteins. And the proteins existed, but they were just broken down cells in lab experiments. They're nothing to do with viruses, etc. So that's how it starts. That's how the whole genomics thing started.
But also, I think, do you want to talk about the mutations with, like, what happens with variants and stuff, and the problems with sequencing?
So yeah, and then everyone says, well, these things are mutating over time and da-da-da-da. Well, there's problems with that, because it depends on what protocols you're using.
The programs.
You're going to get slight variations. And for instance, and this is so relevant, when they said that COVID-19 had appeared in Wuhan, Fan Wu and their team published a paper in Nature in February 2020, and they didn't even bother to pretend that they'd, found a virus. They just started sequencing the lung fluid from a 40-year-old man that they said seemed to be sick, and it must be something new, and it must be a virus. Unclear to us as former doctors why they would conclude
new about it.
He had a fever and consolidation, which is known as pneumonia. But for some reason,
they decided they were ready.
For some reason, which Bill Gates and co rewarded this lab with hundreds of thousands of dollars of US dollars later on for their
Discovery.
great discovery. It was all pretty stinky. But they ran 2 computer programs, okay, when they did their genomic sequencing. The first program didn't find anything. It couldn't synthesize a, quote, virus from the short sequences that they did shotgun sequencing. The second program managed to sequence something together that was about 30,000 base pairs long. And they said, that's the coronavirus. Now, Sam and I and others back then were looking at it going, so you mean if you ran one computer program, there was no virus and no pandemic, but you then ran a different computer program and that declared that there was a pandemic? I mean, it's so crazy, this stuff. And when you see what they're actually doing.
Isn't there another Australian connection? Like, I know Melbourne and all the Health Institute, wasn't that really important to the whole, we've sequenced the whole thing or something as well?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Leon Kelly.
Yeah.
Well, we love Leon Kelly. I mean, I don't know. This guy's probably just in the establishment, doesn't know what's going on.
We don't mean to attack him personally.
Yeah, we're not attack. He probably thinks this is all genuine, but there are 2 reasons why Leon Kelly is so important. The first is that his team put out a paper saying that ivermectin is effective against SARS-CoV-2. And we were like, what the heck?
Well, as a pharmacist, wouldn't you think, isn't this weird? Why would you be looking at ivermectin? Is it like, that was the first thing I'm like, where is this coming from? This is not an antiviral. Like, this is strange as a choice.
Yeah.
And Sam and I just totally, we've done like plenty of research into this.
Yeah.
It's published in a scientific journal that gets something like 1.2 million views.
Which never happens.
That's
never.
Unheard of.
Yeah.
Most scientific journals, they're happy if they get a few thousand views.
Because who's reading them? It's just nerds.
Yeah.
And this thing literally goes viral around the world in a mainstream publication.
Yeah.
And at that point, we're like, oh no. But then they sort of, back down from the paper and say, oh, well, maybe ivermectin's not really that good. And there were problems, like definitely with things like, the pharmacokinetics and stuff, because the concentrations would have to be extremely high in a human to replicate what they did in the laboratory. And they, you'd be hitting toxicity in the human if it had, quote, antiviral. But that wasn't it. They got that study out there and it went mainstream, and then it got absorbed by the
alternative health
community. And we were like, guys, you're being gaslit here. This is time. But unfortunately, it was too late. It was too late. Yeah. Ivermectin took off as a proposed treatment, wonder drug for a disease that didn't even exist. And it did not do what they said it was doing. But unfortunately, that was a runaway story. So that was Leon Kelly. Can you believe? That was his team that came up with the original ivermectin paper. And the second Leon Kelly paper in 2020 was the isolation of SARS-CoV-2. And arguably that was one of the most important papers in the world, up there with Fan Wu and Peng Zhu.
Yeah, Peng Zhu
and one other team. Yeah. There were about 4 papers, and I'd say that one was really important, and it gained a lot of traction around the world because it had a photograph of a apparent coronavirus, Now, when Kelly's team first did the electron microscopy, they couldn't.
It didn't really look like a coronavirus.
Didn't look right.
So they had to fiddle with it. They had to add some
trypsin, which is an enzyme,
to make it look better.
We acknowledge in the world of virology, apparently this is totally legitimate, but to us it's hilarious that they have to add an enzyme which then breaks up some of the proteins to create a new particle. And then they published that and said, here we go, here's a coronavirus. And I have a photo of that in A Farewell to Virology if people are interested. And I explain why that is not evidence of a virus and why those images are completely useless.
But the other thing that's important is just, with the different variants that you get, the different strains of so-called viruses, this can also just be accounted for by different software that's being used. And statistically, mathematically, there are errors with these programs. And so you're not getting the same sequence each time. So then they find new variants and strains, and it's what we, what.
I guess to try and tie this all together as well for people as at home as myself. So when they're getting specific sequences, you're talking about like shotgun and getting like little parts and then using computer models to rebuild 30,000 base pairs or whatever it is. Do we know if these are just like sequences in our, say, junk DNA or known protein sequences? Like, can these just be cell debris and like things? You know what I mean? So when people say, oh, we found this here and we found it on the other side of the world, well, maybe that's just that normal for a lung tissue cell as it breaks down, and maybe there's slight variance between my lung cells and yours or a different ethnicity, whatever, just like we have variances in our DNA and proteins in our sequences. So is there kind of, do you get where I'm going here, trying to tie this all together with what they're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's what people need to know. The key issue is, where do the sequences come from? And that's, as I say, we always go back to the original papers where they say that there's a virus, and none of those papers show that there's a virus. All we can say about the origin of those sequences is that they come from biological tissue. And whether it's human cell lines, chicken cell lines, mammalian cell lines, cows and stuff, that you can do experiments and cells will break down, and that these sequences will appear. But that doesn't mean that viruses exist. And that's the number one argument for why this stuff is fraudulent, is that there's a difference, Alex. Now, if I want to see what sequences you've got inside you, I come to your house and I take a sample from you and I make sure it's from you. I don't take a sample from your entire community and get 20,000 blood samples and throw them together and say, I guess these ones are from Alex based on some hunches that I have. You have to go and isolate the thing by itself, and we can do that with bacteria, we can do that with chickens, we can do it with fungal cells, but you can't do it with this imaginary entity that they have called viruses. So and the issue is that they just repeating the process millions of times, like they did during the COVID era. You go on to GSAID, and if there's 20 million sequences there, it doesn't matter. It's just repeating the same process over and over again. And you ask, are these sequences real or not? So there's a couple of issues there. One is that they don't have a technique to confirm that RNA sequences of 30,000 bases exist in nature. You can do it with DNA, the last time I checked, but there's no way to do it with RNA. So it goes into a hypothetical realm where you assume that these things exist. But even if they did exist, you haven't shown that they come from a virus. So it doesn't really matter. Our arguments still don't fall flat if they invent a new technology, which instead of shotgun sequencing, or they have nanopore sequencing as well. That stuff's quite hard to verify, but they say they can do much longer sequence runs. But they're just coming back to the same fallacious problem. They've already claimed in advance that these sequences come from a virus. And we say to them, that's impermissible. Show the virus and then sequence it.
It's like, there was a group called the Perth Group. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, and they were very outspoken. So they were based in Perth in Australia and spoke about HIV and the problems with the HIV virus. And a person that was really pivotal was this lady, Eleni Papadopoulos, incredibly smart lady, physicist. And she said, the problem is they have the virus. The idea is already there. And this is the difficulty. If people think that this is real, it's very hard to try and unwalk all this stuff, because it's been
Well, this gets deep into like a lot of the problems in the world, and we've been tackling the whole mind control and how advanced this programming is that everyone is under with so many issues, right? And it is really hard to undo all this programming. But I know I want to bookmark ivermectin and cancer and some of these newer studies, and we might talk about that later. But let's get into a few more virus things. So when people say, well, how is it that children can all get together at a chickenpox party and all get chickenpox, for example, or like, what do you think the mechanism is behind it when we do see instances of people coming out with diseases that have specific symptoms in a group of people that have all been in close contact.
Yeah, so we'd point out to people, show us the scientific study where chickenpox is shown to be contagious, because the ones we looked at showed that it wasn't contagious.
Yeah.
What they resorted to early last century, they tried that. They tried bringing kids into a room together to make other kids sick. Didn't work, which is odd because these days they claim it's one of the most infectious conditions in the world, that if somebody walks into the room for a couple of seconds, you're now at risk. Well, the studies didn't back that up. Instead, what they did was they took fluid samples from vesicles on sick people's skin and then injected it into other kids and monkeys, who then got a rash. And they said, well, there you go, that's infectious. Now, it's preposterous because it's not controlled. It's not showing the existence of a virus, and injecting foreign things into other people or animals will cause a reaction. So that's a fallacy that it's contagious. But the whole chickenpox party thing is, we got so many requests for that you actually made a whole video about it and how there's no evidence that that's how it works. But
and I think the trouble is this one idea, it actually, you have to break it down into bits, because the idea that these are specific diseases, so even like just take measles, for example, that this is a specific disease. If you get a group of 10 doctors, they'll call it different things. And just because that's how we work, people see, depending on where you come from, where you're trained, the incidence of the disease.
The public health announcements in your area about what to look for.
What's on the front of your mind when you're seeing a patient. It's not as specific as what people believe. Like, what's the difference between chickenpox, smallpox, shingles, different blistering diseases? Like, it becomes this very arbitrary thing.
Spectrum of skin expression, possibly pushing toxins out of the body, and
totally elimination. And when you have this idea, and that we get, this is the most common thing people say to us is, well, how did I get sick? How did we all come down with the same thing? When you actually drill down and ask people, so the idea of germ theory is that there's one specific germ causing one specific disease, which has, certain symptoms underneath that, right?
Well, don't forget about Big Pharma's solution to the problem.
And there's one specific treatment.
Which is one specific antibiotic or
magic bullet, whatever it is. Anyway, when you break it down and ask people, well, what were your symptoms? Tell me, what did you experience? They'll be different. They'll be slightly different. This in itself is not supposed to be, because it's supposed to be the specific, variant of a specific virus.
Yeah. And perhaps, Alex, an example that people can understand about why it can appear to be contagion when it's not. And it always comes back to a common environmental factor. So if you go out to a dinner with your work colleagues or family, and there's 20 people at the table, and 10 people order the chicken, and 10 people order the pasta.
The beef order,
So, and then the next day, 10 people are sick, and they're the people that ate the chicken. Now, we don't say that that was a contagious event. We say that they got food poisoning. So they all got sick at the same time. They had similar presentations. They got feverish, they vomited, some had diarrhea. They all felt terrible, and it passed after 48 hours. That, to some people, if they didn't know, if you had no history there, if you did not know that they all ate the chicken, you'd think, man, something was passing around that night. And it has the appearances of contagion, when in fact it was just a common environmental exposure. And to clarify for people too, it's not the germs in the chicken, it's the chicken breaking down and being inappropriately handled and not fit for human consumption.
Well, this was another light bulb moment at uni for me when we were getting into the biology of specific diseases. And I was there ready thinking, every disease has these specific symptoms and stuff, as you say. And we get into it, and everyone was just, fever, nausea, vomiting, and then fever, nausea, vomit, and then you get into the skin diseases or the gastro, diarrhea, nausea, diarrhea, nausea. It's so they're saying that all these different things all cause basically, it's the opposite of what we're saying. And I think people might think at home that doctors are looking for these specific symptoms and these specific things. It's not. It's basically all the same. There's only certain things that the body does to get rid of all illnesses, right?
Yeah,
totally. And it's geographical in really bizarre ways. Like, for instance, you're not really allowed to make, and we think this is a terrible false diagnosis, not helpful, Lyme disease. But here in New Zealand, that's not a permitted diagnosis because
we don't have ticks here.
We don't have it here, so you can't have it. But if you're in the United States, it's so popular. They love throwing that one around. If you're a celebrity, particularly, you've got the Lyme disease once you get sick. But, that's not permitted. Malaria. Now, you're not allowed to have that if you live in New Zealand or Sydney or somewhere like that, because that's not a thing. Even though we have exactly the same mosquitoes. And we all get bitten in the same ways, and that these mosquitoes, that people are traveling all around the world. But you can see these bizarre inconsistencies we're told. And it's very important that people realize that when they see a doctor, that doctor is under the influence of what the local health authorities and the media are telling that doctor. Yeah. So if that doctor is told, oh my goodness, these anti-vaxxers have caused a measles outbreak and look out for it, then every single time a child comes to a doctor with a fever and a rash, they're saying, oh, this must be measles, particularly if the child's not vaccinated, when previously it might have been hand, foot, and mouth or monkeypox or something else. And yeah, people think that doctors are so attuned to make these specific diagnoses, but you were trained like us and you started questioning it, going, hang on, isn't fever or vomiting or cough, aren't they really quite similar presentations?
And then the other thing that I think is really important is, again, Dan Reuter's work, who wrote the book, Can You Catch a Cold? He did a really great section in his book on nocebo. So, there's placebo, which are things that can make a positive benefit on your health that you can take, there's a placebo effect of a sugar pill, and then there's nocebo, which is the opposite, a negative effect that can happen. And they took patients with cancer and gave half of them chemotherapy and half of the others they gave saline, and they didn't tell them what they were having. And the ones with saline lost their hair, had symptoms of
severe nausea,
vomiting, was sick, like they'd been on chemo. And it was the idea that I'm taking chemotherapy, the expectation of what's going to happen to me, that it manifests. And this plays out. We see this with Contagion and people being around sick people. They fear they're going to get sick, and what you fear will happen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important point. And we do get into a lot of spiritual stuff as well on the channel, and this manifestation, mind over matter, and all that type of thing. And again, another light bulb moment at uni when we're taught that giving someone 2 placebo pills actually has a measurable stronger effect than 1. And then you can give them a black and red capsule and tell them that this is really strong. And again, it'll have a measurable more of a placebo effect. And then the IV, and you give them like a black fluid in a big IV. And again, it's a higher measurable placebo effect. So this stuff's all well documented, as you say.
I was absolutely shocked, Alex. I did a postgraduate master's in pain and pain management as part of my training. And I couldn't believe the doses of morphine you could give someone or saline, and they wouldn't even know what you were giving them. Like you could give, up to something like 5 milligrams intravenously, which is a pretty decent dose. You think, oh, you'd notice that. But it's all about expectations. And you will reach a point, obviously, when the effects of the drug will go beyond the psychological, but at many levels, it's absolutely dependent on what they expect. And the COVID era was really fascinating because people would say to us, how did you guys survive? You didn't do isolation, you didn't do the face masks, you didn't do the vaccines, and you didn't get sick. And we said, exactly. We knew it was fake. We didn't believe in it. So nobody in our household got the least bit sick over that entire time. Whereas we had people that were so scared and they said, oh my goodness, I got it. And, you know, it was pretty touch and go for a few days. I had a really bad headache and, you know, I survived. And then they thank their 4 jabs that they had.
Yeah, that was
and
one.
they think, wow, if I didn't have those 4 jabs, I could have died. But again, it's these expectations and these narratives that people are told.
Yeah, that was crazy. I'm very lucky that I do have a good group of friends that are all pretty awake and none of us got it. We still kept hanging out and that type of stuff. And then you'd see those people. And again, I lost family members and all this type of stuff to this type of thing, these discussions. Oh, I was so sick. Can you imagine how sick I would have been if I hadn't have got my latest booster? And it's like, it's just so hard to break that programming, right? Yeah. Okay, so the next thing I guess people will want to know is, what do we believe causes these diseases? Is it just an accumulation of different toxins? Is it like, do you guys like to get into the EMF and radio waves 5G? Or like, what do you think our body is doing when we is an annual purge when a lot of people get a cold in winter? Or like, what do you ultimately believe is causing these diseases and rashes? And
Yeah, essentially throughout most of history, not much has changed up until, I would say, the 1800s, when synthetic chemicals and EMF, pharmaceuticals, etc., started really wreaking havoc with our health. But, you know, essentially, yeah, it's the same things why people get sick. So in the modern world, a lot of it's dietary. So we have an issue where the amount of food that people eat is usually way too high. So we have obesity epidemics in most of the developed world, and even now in the developing world. So that's going to lead to poor health. We have low quality diets. So despite people having too many calories, they're not actually getting proper nourishment. And so these are people that are sourcing their food from supermarkets and takeaway places and mainstream sources, where they may not realize that the food's being completely depleted through selective breeding, processing, refinement, etc. So they're actually, despite being obese, they're actually malnourished. Third big one, lack of exercise. So we are designed to move, and if we don't move, our joints get stiff, our muscles get weak, our coordination deteriorates, our neurological system starts going to sleep. We need to exercise. It's what we do. But unfortunately, it's so possible now to be completely sedentary. People get food delivered to their house. They get everything they need delivered to their house. They don't even need to walk out the door. So that's a problem. Lack of spiritual connection and some people don't believe in God, and we would say to them, you still need to have a sense of purpose, even if you don't have a belief in God, because without a sense of purpose, you're lost at sea. And often terrible health consequences will develop for people who don't have a sense of purpose. And then, we get to the modern day problems, which are toxicity from both personal toxicity. So these are things like taking pharmaceuticals, vaccines, chemicals that you might put on your body through shampoos and soaps and perfumes, household products, etc. A myriad of chemicals, hundreds of them that people are exposed to and maybe not be familiar with that. Environmental poisoning. So this is the mass use of glyphosate on crops and people ingesting horrendous amounts of chemicals that they may not realize, because that's the way they do things, whether it's potatoes or pumpkins or other crops. They're full of chemicals these days. So there are some of the kind of issues why people get sick. And then the psychological cannot be underestimated. Absolutely huge. So the way we think manifests in illness. Now, if anyone out there is thinking, well, that sounds a bit woo-woo, it's got a basis in science, and that's when you have a thought as a human, usually you have an emotion, and your body will react to an emotion, and it will release hormones and stimulate the nervous system. And how we react to that can determine our health.
Yeah.
So people can honestly and truly lead themselves into a state where they make themselves sick because they are so anxious and so worried about something that they actually will on that very thing that they're worried about.
Yeah.
And so that's really important as well. So, and I'll maybe hand over to Sam to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of what symptoms are, I mean, essentially it's usually an eliminatory system. Our body has only so many ways that it can get rid of a build-up of toxins, and these can build up just from negative thoughts as well. So it's the skin, it's coughing, it's the bowel, the urine, it's so there's only so many actual symptoms, like you talked about earlier, of having why is it fever, headache, that's always the same, because the body can only do so many ways of eliminating things. And we've become, unfortunately, and this was a massive light bulb moment for me, Alex, through this since 2020, was we were taught fever equals infection. That was what it was. And then I realized that was completely wrong. Fever does not equal infection. Fever is part of a healing crisis. It's part of the body trying to flush things out, creating that bonfire inside of us so that you can purge it out. And we need the fever. We don't want to suppress it with medicines and the like. So and this is our body's incredible, amazing, intelligent design that it can do this.
Yeah, and obviously, again, we like the usual limits. If it's a very dangerous high temperature, seek emergency attention, all these caveats that we kind of have to say with fever. But we've
I wouldn't. I can't speak, I'm not giving advice here, but it's most things people can actually, you have to see where you're at. Like if it was something like, if one of our kids was said to have appendicitis, we'd be quite happy to manage that at home. But if people are not happy to manage that kind of thing, like a high temperature and abdominal pain, then they may need help.
And you need to say you need to know yourself what your limit is and what you're happy to do. And if you're not feeling comfortable, that's
absolutely. I think that's just that kind of common sense stuff I was getting at. We don't want anyone at home like having seizures or something like that for kids with temperatures and stuff. But we've spoken a lot on the channel about everything you just touched on there, like trying to grow your own food if you can't, organic markets, sauna, exercise, filtering your water, like all that stuff is just kind of essential to do these days, because we know they're spraying the skies and it's just coming at us from all angles these days, right? But any thoughts on, probably sunlight is that one we haven't touched on, and the importance of that, not just for vitamin D, the basics, but really the circadian rhythm and everything else that comes along with that.
Yeah, I might get Sam to talk on the sunlight thing, but just to touch on what you said, it's important too that people don't get into a state of complete panic about what's happened to our environment, our health institutions and all that kind of stuff, because the body is resilient and it has remarkable ability to heal. And it's important that we think about mitigation rather than complete elimination.
100%.
And so, for instance, with things, like glyphosate, there is some that's going to get into your body. You can't really avoid it because it does go into the air. It does probably get into, you might go to a restaurant, not very often, but once in a while, and you might get a microdose. Don't worry, that's not the thing that's going to kill you. Aluminium's the same. We live in the age of aluminium. The best things you can obviously do are avoid vaccinations, which are laden with aluminium often, but you're going to get some. It's going to end up in your body, and the things you do are just mitigate. You do the best things that you can, and if you concentrate on those things, you'll be absolutely fine. EMF is another thing. We don't know how dangerous it is. Probably it's not great. If you live anywhere near a city, you're going to get exposure. Just mitigate. Just say, okay, well, I'll keep Wi-Fi out of my house, or I'll put a Faraday case over the router. You can do things just to cut things back a bit. But the worst thing we see is people in the sort of health freedom space get into a state of panic where they say, oh my goodness, I think that they've sprayed us again, or I think that they've contaminated this or that. Yep, this has all been going on for hundreds of years, in various ways. So I really encourage people to say, well, what can you do to mitigate, rather than think that you have to live in
the bush,
in the Australian outback.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And we do to that message. And I think once you do the work and realize all this and go fully through the awakening process, it's like any trauma where you have to go through that denial, anger, grief, and then acceptance. And you get to a point where you can kind of laugh at all this stuff. And yeah, again, I still enjoy, a few drinks or eating out and takeaway or some junk food every now and again. Again, it's because it's just that no fear of anything, I think, is the most important place to get to, as you say.
Yeah, totally. And like, we will sometimes go to a restaurant where we're not actually 100% sure where they're getting their food from, but we don't eat there every day or anything like that. And you don't want to get to the state where you think, oh my goodness, I can't eat anything that I haven't grown on my own land or whatever. As I say, you can do so much to improve your health, and the rest of it your body will take care of. It's resilient. But I'll get Sam to talk about the sunlight.
The sunlight thing was a little bit funny, because I'll tell you a quick story, Alex, if that's okay. I grew up, I have very fair skin, and I grew up with sunscreen and being lathered with it my whole life, and I could never get a suntan. Okay. And then I wanted to do a video on sunscreen because I was interested in it and thought, what is the evidence actually behind this? Because it's very high in aluminium. Okay. It's just the bottom line with that. And anyway, I thought, okay, I'm not going to use this anymore. What am I going to do? And we live on a 10-acre block with animals and stuff. And I'm often outside. And then I realized I'm just going to go out and I'm just going to like exercise, just do it more and more. And then for the first time ever, I got a tan. And to me, it was like, oh my gosh, how can this be?
This is pretty tanned up.
Nice.
But it was just this realization. I had this phobia, this fear of the sun, and that I thought of being burnt, and I didn't want to be outside. And I think it's so incredibly important. And it's even things like sunglasses. I don't use sunglasses anymore.
No,
and I think it's important to get the light and to get used to it. And I think it's good for our eyes and our brain. And like you say, our sleep, our circadian rhythms. There's so much. We're designed to be outside. It's not just, and we've become so tech obsessed. That's, to me, one of the biggest toxicities is technology, where people are on their phones and just not moving and the rest of it. But
I think too, one thing that Sam worked out was that she went from using sunscreen, which people should not do, by the way. It's a really bad thing. And I think what happened was that you became way more aware of how much time you could spend in the sun.
Yes, yeah.
Like once upon a time, you'd be putting on sunscreen, but then parts of your body would get burned.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And now, without any of that stuff, you'll just go out and have a feeling like, I've had enough sun, and come back inside, and you don't get burnt. Yeah. And if we are spending more time in the sun, we just, you put on a long sleeve light top, put on a hat, wide brim hat, stuff like that.
Yeah,
and you're absolutely fine.
The whole thing with sun and cancer, I mean, it's really bad. I made a video on this of it's basically, they've just asserted that UV light causes cancer. It's based on some formula. It's just an assertion, isn't it?
No, we did an episode. We had an expert on about sunscreen causing cancer, and we're starting to see skin cancers in areas that aren't even sun exposed.
Totally.
The cancer rates took off in Australia with the slip, slop, slap campaign. It's all. I call it satanic inversion. Once you learn who's running the world, all the ways they play these tricks. Final thing on sunlight, though, I'd encourage everyone at home in the sun gazing. Early morning or evening, we don't want people staring at the sun. But I find it funny, like you say, that people will stare at these bright blue screens in their dark bedrooms late at night or first thing in the morning, but they're scared of the sun, which is natural and been around forever. No. And when you do that sun gazing and have that magical experience where you see the outline of the sun, and it's an incredible thing I'd encourage everyone to do.
Yeah.
Definitely. And it's interesting that your the person you had on was the same, because Sam's video was called does sunscreen cause cancer? Because our research was the same, because like you in Australia, we had the slip, slop, slap campaigns. We probably had similar TV commercials that were airing from the 1980s. Yeah. And they encouraged all of us to do this stuff. And then cancer rates have gone up about fourfold since that time, despite the fact that kids are doing it from a young age now, putting on the sunscreen. And like you say, it's not farmers and builders getting cancer. It's office workers who are inside all day. Yeah. They're the ones getting melanomas and stuff. And, they go out and they're so scared of the sun, and they only put sunscreen on everywhere. And it's really disgusting to see that these societies that are supposedly trying to help us are actually doing the opposite. Yeah. And they're telling us these terrible practices, which is to put sunscreen on. And, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a offshoot of the pharma industry. And, of course, they are going to tell you to slop these products on.
Yeah, compared to back in the 70s when we see the footage of people at cricket sitting on the hill all day in just their little shorts with a carton of beer, and they're all brown as anything. And, it's funny to look back on how scared people have become of the sun, right? Anything we haven't touched on today? I mean, do you want to touch on bacteria and viruses and kind of their role, and we can observe those, but do you think that they can be a cause of disease when they overtake certain cellular tissues? Is that a lot easier a model to understand, or anything to add with that space?
Well, I think, obviously, we've covered some viral stuff, the virus model here, but so the other big fallacy is that germs or
pathogens,
bacteria, stuff that has been shown to exist, can somehow cause disease. And they have a term, pathogens, and they say that these, which is a noun, which means microbes that cause disease. And the problem is that there's no studies which show that bacteria cause disease in healthy people, or transmit to cause disease. That's not a thing.
We've been looking for like 5 years.
So when someone gets, like, the basic question for people home, they get a cut and it gets infected and there's pus or whatever, is that, again, the body's protective mechanism trying to push something out? Or, like, why do you think we do find bacteria in certain places when someone is sick, kind of thing?
Yeah,
well, first of all, it's important to know how they changed the definition of words. So we mentioned earlier, virus meant poison before it became this perverted description they have now. Infection, correctly, was known as staining or ruining tissue. That's what it was originally known as. That's what the doctors and scientists called it. It had nothing to do with germs. So these days, infection means invasion by germs. But again, there's no study on Earth which shows healthy tissue will be invaded by germs. That doesn't happen. The germs are everywhere. They're on us, they're in us at all times. In fact, in a human, there are more microbial cells than, quote, human cells. So we're a walking ecosystem. If you disinfected or sterilized us, we'd be dead within days. They tried that with animals last century. Raising them in sterile conditions.
Sterile food.
Just for people at home that haven't heard that stat before, is it roughly there might be 1 trillion cells in a human and 10 trillion sort of bacterial cells throughout our gut and on our skin and everything? Is that roughly the numbers you guys have heard as well? Or?
It's contentious about how many cells that we have, but it's said roughly something like 1 trillion. And they say that there's at least that number and maybe more of microbial cells, which are considered non-human. But as we say, they're required for life, but we can't live without them. In terms of by weight, we're said to have about 1.2 kilograms.
Yeah, it's like a pound or something.
Of bacterial cells.
Yeah, 3 pounds maybe.
Inside us.
Yeah.
So we're walking around with heaps and these tiny little cells. So so this is not a thing though where the microbes can instigate or cause disease. So your example of an abscess or some pus is broken down tissue. And when tissue breaks down, nature has a remedy for that, which is to send in the microbes to process the tissue. They're like a cleanup crew, if you like. Now, the body or nature is not going to distinguish whether that's attached to your body or being cut off from your body, if you have dying tissue on your body, the microbes will move in and they will start to break it down because that tissue's devitalized, and tissue's in different states. Like, this is why you see older people, sometimes their feet start breaking down because there's not enough nutrition and blood going to that area. And then what the medical system calls fungal infections or bacterial infections is just tissue breaking down. It's tissue that is no longer living or no longer vital enough, and the microbes come in to clean things up. So yeah, pus is just like a collection of broken down tissue. And the mistake that the mainstream model makes is that they take a culture and they go, wow, staphylococcus and X, Y, and Z everywhere, when in fact that's what you'd expect. It's broken down tissue. You'll find those same bacteria on healthy people, just in much smaller numbers. Like, they'll be in you and on you, ready to go. And sometimes they even change their very form. You know, we call that pleomorphism, where they'll go from an inactive state or a kind of dormant state to a highly active metabolic state.
And also, there's a really good analogy. You've probably heard it before, Alex, but it's the fireman analogy, where if you've got like a house is on fire and then, you know, the firemen come in to hose it down, you're not saying that the fireman caused the fire. And that's the same, is that we're not, because they're there at the time, always at scenes of the fire, doesn't mean that they're the cause. And it's such a common misconception. And we, like Mark's saying, we can't live without them. I mean, it's such a positive, beautiful thing, where if we didn't have microbes, we'd have all this junk, all this garbage building up everywhere, because nothing would be able to be broken down.
And I think it's important because, Alex, I think maybe you were going to get to this, was that, but can the microbes actually start causing damage once they really start to multiply? And again, the analogy would be, if your house is on fire, the firemen are not going to stand around and do things quietly. They're going to flood your house with water. They're going to kick down the doors with their boots and their axes, and they're potentially going to even get chainsaws out and start cutting bits away to stop further damage, because they are trying to prevent the entire thing from, you know, being destroyed. And that's where people get confused with bacteria, because they say, well, look, the bacteria are now just so prolific and they're producing so much waste that the person's actually getting sick. That may happen, yeah. Like, you may get to a point where your body is so traumatized that it's gone beyond the point where you can stay alive, and the bacteria will seem to be the bad guys, when all they're doing is just metabolizing the breaking down tissue.
Yeah. Does this probably a good segue into cancer? And I've imagined some of these new research studies. I've seen some of these studies claiming that doctors are now finding parasites in biopsies or in the spinal cord. Like, what are your thoughts on, you know, is cancer a variety of illnesses, or the body getting rid of toxins and, you know, mistranslation of cells and mutations causing abnormal growths? Some people say they're dependent on sugar. What are your thoughts on everything cancer related?
Well, the first thing to know is that cancer is it's a systemic problem. It's a problem of the body. It's not a problem of a particular area, even though it may manifest in a particular area. Something has gone wrong with the entire body. The second thing to know is that cancers come about because of going against the laws of nature. And we talked about those factors, about why people get sick.
Yes.
And if they don't reverse those causes, they can progress to a state that we call cancer. And usually it's identifiable factors. Like, sometimes it's not. Like, there might be an environmental toxin, you know, that people didn't know about. Like, they used to use aniline and other compounds in dyes in factories, and the workers got horrendous exposure and all started developing cancers.
Bladder cancers.
The tanning industry, they got bladder cancers and stuff. Now, in those circumstances, we don't really blame those people that they were put into a situation where they actually just got poisoned, and there wasn't much they could do about it. But usually it's lifestyle issues that need to be reversed, and dramatically reversed. So Parasites, again, this comes under really the germ umbrella. Parasites are slightly different because they're usually bigger entities. Often they can be seen with the naked eye, although some of them still require a microscope. We don't. We only use the term parasite for entities like the government, because a parasite, by definition, benefits itself at the expense of a host. And we don't really find that in nature. What we find in nature is the terrain changes and different organisms will start to act depending on, the underlying terrain. So, for instance, in our parts of the world, intestinal worms, like huge ones, would be extremely uncommon. But you can go to places in Africa and North Korea where the people are infested with worms, and those worms are there as a response to the toxicity that's in those bodies. They've been poisoned by things, they're malnourished, etc., and the worms are just reacting to those conditions. So we definitely do not look at parasites as that certain people would, saying that they are damaging a host at the host's expense.
In that nature example, when we have the parasites, for example, that get into a bug and make the bug more likely to go out and get eaten by the bird, and that's kind of, you look at that as a cycle of life, kind of natural interaction. Yeah,
you'd have to look at it, and it could be complicated. Like, has something happened where the host is proliferating in numbers that nature's not happy with, and now something has to be done about it? Because, as you know, on the African plains, who's in the right, the antelope or the lion? People might take sides, but they're both required to balance things out. And parasites often have the same kind of effect in ecosystems where something's got out of control. And sometimes we do things that affect nature in ways that we don't anticipate. Like recently we did a thing on bees and why beehives might collapse. And a lot of it's due to what we do. We put bees together in unnatural numbers, and we want certain amounts of honey from them for commercial purposes. And this may cause all sorts of issues with what appear to be parasites, when in fact nature's just reacting and saying,
this seems to be a theme. This seems to be a theme, doesn't it? With herding chickens tightly into a coop, or like not getting fresh air, clean water. Like, just as soon as you get out of balance with nature and natural law, which we've touched on plenty of times now today, it seems that these illnesses present themselves differently through different species.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the whole thing about parasites was, again, this is some narrative that's just gone crazy in recent years, which is why we've done presentations on it, and why we've said we do not find any evidence that they are the cause of disease. They may react to certain conditions and may start proliferating. And whether they're associated with cancer or not, that's irrelevant, because you still have to reverse the conditions that led to that in the first place. And to us, reversing the conditions does not involve the introduction of synthetic pharmaceuticals such as fenbendazole and ivermectin.
So if we're seeing like a study that's saying that, ivermectin, fenbendazole has cured X amount of people with stage 4 cancer, again, you're saying maybe it is killing the parasites and maybe they were there, but again, you've still got to get to the root cause of the issue, or it could come back, type of thing.
I think, as you said earlier, we know they use radiation to, quote, treat cancer. And I mean, Sam and I have seen that because we used to work in the system where they have a tumor and you blast it with radiation and it shrinks. It doesn't mean that you've cured anything. It means that you made the cellular mass shrink. You haven't reversed the underlying causes. You don't know why that, in their system, they don't know why that mass appeared in the first place. So, you have to be very careful about, and chemotherapy is the same. I mean, we've seen that. You do a CT scan, give someone some chemotherapy, and then they say, well, the tumor's 50% smaller. I mean, that's not curing the problem. That's just a reaction to the pharmaceutical. So for us, ivermectin and fenbendazole, etc., fall into that same category. And we would say there's no way that adding another pharmaceutical is going to correct what caused the problem in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, my 2 cents on it is that we've had we've had parasites with us as humans forever. Cancer rates have gone up exponentially. It is not to do with parasites, just on an epidemiological level. But I also think this has come about because of what people are seeing under microscopes with, these images of this looks like a parasite, this person has cancer. And for people that actually really want to look into this stuff, I'd totally recommend the Biggleson brothers from the States. They are the only ones that really know what they're doing with looking at like a live blood type analysis. And, again, I think it's lack of experience of what people are looking at. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm not an expert on this, but just the people that do know, this has been looked at for decades. It's not what people think. And these drugs like fenbendazole, ivermectin, there's this whole kind of thing that, oh, no, they're really safe and they've been used lots and stuff. These are toxic medications. These are pharmaceuticals, and they have been promoted from the get-go since they came out. We made a video on ivermectin. It was the wonder drug. It was, came from the veterinary industry and has just been, pushed massively. Anything that suppresses symptoms it's not going to address the cause. Yeah. The cause of cancer is not because you've had a ivermectin deficiency or fenbendazole deficiency. I mean, this is the same kind of thinking. And it kind of makes me annoyed because I think it distracts people like the virus model. It's a cover you don't get to the real cause of actually what's going on, and you can't really help people. Yeah. And I think the true causes of cancer is it is wrong living and wrong thinking. And that can be, I know that's really generic, but it can be very hard. You have to go to the person and find out exactly what's been going on for them. Cool. And I lost a good friend, a few years ago from rectal cancer. And I know so much of it was her thinking. And I'm sure that's what actually, killed her in the end. But it's like, how do you...
Yeah. Well, last couple of questions, because I know we've been going for a while now and it's been absolutely brilliant. And no stress if you guys aren't across these topics, but any thoughts on plant medicines? And I've been pretty big on psychedelics and some of the new research coming out. Again, these are things that are straight from nature with a bit of evidence around their ability to help heal the mind and heal trauma, depression and that type of thing. And we've spoken about that, the importance of the mind in healing. So any thoughts on that sort of stuff, or it's not your ballpark, that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really look into things like psychedelics and stuff. From our point of view, we say that nature has provided, or to us, God has provided everything we need. And that's made clear in Genesis right from the start. So for Sam and I, we say, look, the food will be your medicine. And if you make, good choices with what you eat and what you drink, your health will follow suit. We don't believe that there are any specific supplements or magic bullets out there. And it's interesting, the position we've been in, because when, Sam's stuff went across the world, from 2020 onwards, people started sending her stuff from all over the place, and everyone had a different supplement or device or cure. And we've got a whole bookshelf of them now. And it's interesting because every single person says, hey, this is the key, Dr. Bailey's. Can you please get the magnesium out there? Please get the vitamin C out there. Please get this device out there. Please get the ivermectin out there. Yeah. And we literally have dozens and dozens and dozens. I keep some of them just for interest. Some of them we just throw out. But it's incredible that, we've got to the point where it makes us more sure of what we do and what we say, is that there are no magic bullets. There's no magic supplements or techniques. It's just general healthy living.
What do you think, after all your research, was in the COVID vaccines and the sort of fallout we've seen from that now? Any thoughts for people at home? And again, is there natural things that can help clear that out of the body, or is it just the general health protocols we've already discussed to be as healthy as you can be, no matter if you've had it or not?
I mean, what's in them is really hard, because unless you've got very high-tech, expensive facilities, it's pretty hard for citizen scientists to work out what's in them. We've had a bit of a crack at that. Well, not us personally, but friends of ours have tried to work out what's in them. And it's honestly quite difficult. And that's why Sam mentioned the Biggleson brothers, Adam and Josh. And I really think if people are concerned about things like nanotech, etc.,
graphene,
just listen to the Bigglesons, because their family's been doing this stuff for decades, and a lot of the appearances, which initially were thought to represent some sort of new technology, have been appearing for decades in blood analysis and vaccine analysis and stuff. So I'd say don't get too hooked up in some of the fear narratives that are out there. For us, we deal with the upstream issue, which is that vaccines have no role whatsoever in anybody's health program. So our focus is obviously on looking at, do viruses exist? Is germ theory a thing? Is immunology a thing? And to us, they're not. They're all fallacious. So we would say there's absolutely no reason why you'd take any vaccine. And this includes everything. Like, people might say, well, hey, what about tetanus and stuff? We've covered all of those things and shown why science doesn't support them. To the third part, which is people that have taken the vaccine, if you've got terrible regrets, first of all, forgive yourself.
Totally.
We've all made mistakes with our own health and with the health of our families, etc. And the first thing to do is say, okay, made a mistake, but I need to move on from that now, because we are meeting people that are just totally now into a fear paradigm where they think, I took the shot, I'm going to die, all this kind of negative stuff. And look, for most people, they were nasty, those shots, but most people didn't get killed by them, and most people didn't actually get that sick from them, thankfully. I'm not saying that they weren't incredibly toxic, but most people seem to be okay. So all you do is say, hey, I forgive myself for that little mistake, and now I know more, and just concentrate on all the things we've talked about to be healthy.
We're not, can I just say, we're not big on protocols, Alex. Like, I think that kind of, again, distracts you from, it's about right living, basically, is all you need. And because to be honest, I see some people that never got vaccinated and are really sick. And it's their mental state. It's the resentment about, losing their job from not getting vaccinated, and still thinking about this. And you think, and they're not well because of this thinking and that. And it's, I think you can look at it lots of different ways, but just like you said, I think forgiveness is crucial, and just to live a good life, and it's like the whole geoengineering thing, like we talked about earlier. You can get kind of paranoid about it and get angry and think, why are they doing this to us? And they're spraying us, and where am I going to get my food and all this kind of stuff? And I think you've just got to let it go and go, we have been perfectly created, and it's okay. Like, we can do this. And I think of it as like a really great blessing what's happened, because beforehand I was very much asleep to a lot of stuff. woke up. And I'm grateful now that I think, wow, we can, it's all good. Like, knowing what you know, I'd rather know it and then just live a great life than be in the dark sort of thing.
Yeah. I'd say too, just if I could add, Alex, because other people will wonder about, well, what about other types of vaccines? And if you or your child has had the childhood vaccine schedule, in the modern era, so from sort of 1990 onwards, or if you've had lots and lots of flu jabs, etc., you probably do want to consider a detox. And the only way we know how, that it has real scientific backing through the work of Professor Chris Exley in the UK, is to drink high silica water, and that will help flush out the aluminium that's got into your system, because the aluminium from vaccines, unlike aluminium that you might swallow, most of that will pass out. But when it's in a vaccine, unfortunately, most of it's now stuck in your body.
It goes to your bones and your brain.
It's going to be stuck. It's got to sequester, like Sam says, in the bone or the brain. So the only way that's been proven to get that out is through high silica water. So here we have Antipodes water in New Zealand, which is available in Australia as well.
We're not affiliated with them, just so you know. We
probably sell a lot of water.
Yeah, we probably do, but we just believe in it.
And
Nice.
if you're in Japan, there's Smith water, and anywhere else in the world, you've got
Fiji water and stuff.
Fiji water.
Yeah, there's a whole list of them, but high silica water.
So if you're out there and you're worried that you've taken a lot of these other vaccines, or your kids have
flu shots or whatever,
just start drinking half a litre of high silica water and do that for 3 to 6 months.
Awesome. Well, guys, that's been amazing. I knew it would be, but I'd love to have you guys on again in future. I'll put the links to follow all your stuff down below for people at home. But any final thoughts for people?
I think, as we might have mentioned, just don't outsource your health, because the medico-pharma system it's a system based on profit, and it's become so big that it's associated with the insurance industry is now the biggest industry in the world. So don't make any mistakes about how they will continue to protect their patch. And we say the best thing you can do is to learn how to look after yourself and your family.
Yeah. No, just thank you for the opportunity, Alex. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Amazing. Keep up the great work, and we'll have to catch up again in future. Cheers.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alex.